The U-Haul truck groaned laboriously up the final stretch of the unpaved mountain road, kicking up clouds of ochre dust that settled quickly on the dense pine needles lining the way. Inside the cab, Elias Thorne gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, a mixture of anticipation and sheer exhaustion washing over him. This was the culmination of months of planning, paperwork, and packing. His destination was the cabin at the end of the road, a remote, ruggedly beautiful property he had purchased for the express purpose of escaping the noise and demands of city life. The cabin sat just beyond the formal, gated entrance to the Whispering Ridge Preserve, a private, upscale community managed by an HOA notorious throughout the region for its rigid enforcement and aggressive demeanor. Elias had known about the HOA's reputation. In fact, their stringent rules were precisely why the cabin property, which had been intentionally partitioned out of the original developer's plat decades ago, had remained gloriously, defiantly outside their jurisdiction. His deed was clear: he owned the land, he owned the cabin, and he owed the HOA nothing. As the U-Haul lumbered past the stone columns marking the preserve's entrance, Elias noticed a car parked discreetly off to the side, partially concealed by a thicket of scrub oak. A woman, tightly wound and impeccably dressed despite the rustic setting, was talking rapidly and heatedly into a cell phone, her body language conveying a high degree of agitation and self-importance. Elias didn't need a formal introduction to know he was witnessing his first official interaction with the local HOA enforcer, likely the board president or a similarly self-appointed neighborhood tyrant. He ignored her and proceeded toward his property, which lay about a quarter-mile further down the road, clearly marked by a small, hand-painted sign that read Thorne's Ridge. He managed to park the massive truck right up against the small, sturdy cabin, his moving crew two burly, silent cousins already jumping out to begin unloading the first boxes. They had barely lowered the ramp when the screech of tires announced the arrival of the agitated woman from the entrance. She pulled her expensive SUV up sideways, blocking a good portion of the already narrow lane, and erupted from the car, marching toward Elias with the gait of someone prepared to deliver an immediate, unforgiving verdict. "Stop! Stop right there!" she shrieked, her voice carrying unnaturally well in the quiet mountain air. Elias turned, slowly wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. He was tall, rugged, and entirely unimpressed. "You cannot move in," the woman declared, planting her hands on her hips. "I am Brenda Albright, president of the Whispering Ridge Preserve Homeowners Association, and this move is not authorized. You are in violation." Elias sighed, a deep, tired sound. "Good afternoon, Ms. Albright. With all due respect, I am Elias Thorne, and I am moving into my lawfully owned, deeded property. Since my property is not, and never has been, part of the Whispering Ridge Preserve HOA, I don't require your authorization for anything." He gestured toward the U-Haul. "As you can see, the move is already underway." Brenda's face immediately contorted in a mixture of disbelief and fury. "That is absolutely false. That parcel was grandfathered under our original community plan. You are required to submit architectural plans for approval, pay the initiation fee, and schedule your move with the management company. You have done none of these things, and you are creating an eyesore. I just spoke with our legal counsel, and we are prepared to issue a cease and desist order immediately." She took a step closer, raising her hand as if physically stopping the process. "Ms. Albright, I have the title documentation right here," Elias countered calmly, pointing to his laptop on the passenger seat. "It explicitly excludes my parcel from the CC&Rs. And a cease and desist order from an entity that has no jurisdiction over me is merely a politely worded piece of paper." He then looked pointedly at her aggressively parked SUV. "If you don't mind, You're blocking my moving truck. You are now trespassing and interfering with commerce. This factual dismissal of her authority only fueled her rage. She spun away, pulling her phone back out, her fingers flying across the keypad. That's it? This is unpermitted occupation. You have left me no choice. She hissed into the phone. I am calling the authorities right now. I am reporting a hostile, unapproved intrusion into our private community. I am requesting immediate police dispatch to enforce the community laws and remove this unauthorized person. She spoke with such theatrical conviction, invoking private community and enforce community laws, that it was clear she genuinely believed the local police force served as her personal enforcement arm. Elias just watched, a slight, almost amused smile playing on his lips. She had just made the critical mistake of escalating a civil, property boundary dispute into a law enforcement matter. He knew the police would have to respond to a 911 call, but he was quietly confident that when they arrived, they would quickly realize exactly who was authorized, and who was in violation of the law. The shrill sound of Brenda Albright's voice proclaiming a hostile, unapproved intrusion was still echoing slightly in the mountain silence when the distant, faint wail of a police siren began to drift down the valley. Elias's two cousins, who had been wrestling a heavy dresser off the ramp, paused, looking at Elias with raised eyebrows. Elias simply gave a shrug and a slight, confident smile. Just another layer of paperwork, he murmured, before instructing them to continue unloading. He wasn't going to let the histrionics of one entitled woman interrupt his hard-earned day. Brenda, meanwhile, stood near her car, her posture rigid with self-importance, watching the road with a triumphant, expectant air, clearly anticipating the sight of a squad car roaring up to validate her authority and haul Elias off the premises. The sirens grew louder, closer, before finally cutting off as the patrol vehicle turned off the main highway. A moment later, a marked sheriff's vehicle, a clean, official unit bearing the insignia of the county sheriff's department, cruised slowly past the main stone entrance pillars of Whispering Ridge Preserve and continued down the dirt track toward Elias's cabin. The deputy driving, a stern-faced, middle-aged woman named Deputy Miller, drove carefully, clearly noting the aggressively parked SUV belonging to the complainant. Deputy Miller pulled up near the U-Haul, parking officially and professionally. She emerged from the vehicle, her hand resting lightly on her sidearm, her demeanor strictly professional as she assessed the scene: a moving truck, two large men unloading boxes, a tall homeowner looking amused, and a woman, Brenda Albright, looking ready to explode with self-vindication. Brenda rushed forward before the deputy could even finish closing her door. "Deputy. Thank you for the rapid response. I am Brenda Albright, the president of the HOA here. This man," she declared, pointing an accusing finger at Elias, "is illegally occupying a structure within our community boundaries and refusing to comply with the covenants. He is creating a traffic hazard and must be removed immediately." Deputy Miller raised a placating hand toward Brenda. Her eyes, however, were focused entirely on Elias. "Ma'am, I understand. I was dispatched to a report of an unauthorized intrusion and trespassing. I need to speak with the gentleman." She walked past Brenda, whose face was a perfect portrait of indignation at being dismissed, and approached Elias. "Sir, I am Deputy Miller with the County Sheriff's Department. Can you tell me what's going on here, and if you are the owner of this property?" Elias stepped forward calmly. "Deputy Miller, I'm Elias Thorne. Yes, I am the owner of this parcel, Thorne's Ridge. I took possession this morning and am currently moving in. The woman who called you, Ms. Albright, is the president of the HOA for the adjacent subdivision, Whispering Ridge Preserve. She claims I am trespassing, but I assure you, my property is legally and intentionally excluded from their jurisdiction. He paused, then reached into the cab of the U-Haul and retrieved a heavy manila folder. I anticipated this might happen, Deputy. Here is the certified deed for the property, the original 1985 plat map with my parcel clearly marked as excluded from the HOA boundaries, and a letter from the county assessor confirming the property is assessed independently and not subject to the preserve's fees. He presented the folder with the clear, concise professionalism of someone who was accustomed to dealing with regulations and legal documents. Deputy Miller accepted the folder and stepped back slightly, her expression unreadable as she began to flip through the documents. As she examined the official county seal on the plat map and the explicit exclusion clause in the deed, Brenda hovered, her voice high-pitched and insistent. Deputy, those documents are irrelevant. He's adjacent to our community. The spirit of the covenants applies. He cannot simply claim exemption. Deputy Miller held up a hand, silencing Brenda without even looking at her. She spent a solid minute reviewing the maps and the deed description, her professional scrutiny confirming what Elias had stated. When she finally looked up, she handed the folder back to Elias. Her expression was now entirely focused on Brenda, and it was one of distinct disapproval. Ms. Albright, Deputy Miller stated, her voice firm and authoritative, according to the official county records, the property designated as Thorn S. Ridge, Parcel 4B, is explicitly not subject to the covenants, conditions, and restrictions of the Whispering Ridge Preserve Homeowners Association. Mr. Thorn is currently on his own, lawfully owned private property. He is neither trespassing nor committing any crime. Brenda was aghast, her face paling slightly. But we called 911. He is in violation of our rules. Deputy Miller's voice hardened further. Ma'am, the Sheriff's Department enforces county, state, and federal law. We do not enforce HOA bylaws, particularly when the property in question is outside your jurisdiction. Furthermore, she added, her eyes narrowing slightly as she looked around at the peaceful scene of the moving truck, calling 911 and reporting a hostile intrusion, knowing the true nature of the dispute, could be considered filing a false report, which is a crime. You tied up an emergency line for a civil property disagreement where no emergency existed. She glanced pointedly at the U-Haul and the busy, non-hostile cousins. You are now impeding the lawful movement of personal goods onto private property. I must ask you to move your vehicle immediately and leave Mr. Thorne and his moving crew alone. The complete and total collapse of Brenda's authority was breathtaking. She had brought the actual authorities down on herself, not Elias. The deputy, far from arresting the homeowner, was now protecting him from the HOA president. The silence that followed Deputy Miller's pronouncement was absolute, save for the rhythmic thud of boxes being unloaded from the U-Haul ramp. Brenda Albright, her face cycling rapidly through shock, fury, and finally, a sort of defeated impotence, stumbled back toward her car. The authority she had wielded so carelessly moments before had been thoroughly and decisively stripped away by a single, focused law enforcement professional. She muttered something incoherent about calling the HOA's lawyer, but the threat lacked all conviction, sounding more like a desperate plea than a legal warning. With a jerky, furious maneuver that kicked up more dust than the U-Haul, she backed her SUV up and sped away, leaving behind only the fading scent of entitlement and expensive perfume. Deputy Miller watched her go, then turned back to Elias with a weary but apologetic sigh. Mr. Thorne, I apologize for the disruption. You've clearly done your homework, and the county records are solid. That woman has a history of these kinds of calls. When a complaint is filed using the 911 emergency line, we are required to respond. She paused, then offered a small, knowing smile. It's not every day we're called out to settle a dispute over a deed restriction, especially one where the complainant is so clearly in the wrong. Elias thanked her sincerely, appreciating her professionalism and her swift reading of the situation. He knew that for many people, the sight of a squad car arriving could be intimidating, regardless of their innocence, but Deputy Miller's steady competence had instantly validated his legal position. Before the deputy could leave, however, a second vehicle pulled up, this one an unmarked sedan. A man in his late 50s, dressed in casual yet expensive hiking gear, stepped out. This was Sheriff Randall Hayes, the county sheriff himself, whose interest had been piqued by the unusual dispatch report involving a prominent HOA and a potential trespassing complaint at a previously quiet parcel. Sheriff Hayes approached the scene, nodding to Deputy Miller and looking curiously at the U-Haul. Randall Hayes, county sheriff, he introduced himself, extending a hand to Elias. Deputy Miller gave me the rundown on the radio. Looks like Mrs. Albright was having a bad morning. He chuckled lightly, but his eyes were sharp and assessing. He then looked closer at Elias, a sudden flicker of recognition crossing his features. He didn't ask about the HOA dispute, instead, he tilted his head, studying Elias's build and his calm, controlled posture. I know this is going to sound odd, Mr. Thorne, but have we met before? You look incredibly familiar, like someone I might have seen at the academy or a training seminar. Elias offered a genuine smile, the amusement he'd stifled earlier finally breaking through. He knew the moment was ripe for the second, far more unexpected reveal. Sheriff Hayes, it's a pleasure. You probably haven't met me, but you might recognize my file photo. I've spent the last 25 years with the state police, up until last month. I took an early retirement. I was the chief of the 5th Division. The sheriff's eyes widened instantly. The 5th Division was one of the state's largest and most respected law enforcement branches, and the chief of that division was a figure known by virtually every major law enforcement head in the region. Sheriff Hayes immediately straightened, his demeanor shifting from casual inquiry to one of profound professional respect. Chief Thorne? Of course. Good Lord, the beard and the mountain air threw me off. It's an honor, sir. Welcome to the county, officially. He turned to Deputy Miller, a grin spreading across his face. Deputy, you just resolved a trespassing dispute for a former state chief. The tension that had lingered in the air completely dissipated, replaced by an atmosphere of camaraderie and mutual professional respect. Sheriff Hayes moved from questioning a potential suspect to welcoming a peer. He apologized profusely for the intrusion orchestrated by the HOA, assuring Elias that he would personally ensure that the county prosecutor was briefed on Brenda Albright's clear misuse of the 911 system. He then stepped forward and clapped Elias lightly on the shoulder. Forget the paperwork, Chief. Welcome to the neighborhood, properly. It was a profound and hilarious irony. The HOA had called the highest local authority to have Elias removed, only for that authority to end up warmly welcoming him as one of their own. As Sheriff Hayes and Deputy Miller prepared to leave, the sheriff looked over the U-Haul one last time. Just so you know, Chief, he said, turning back to Elias with a final, mischievous grin, we have an excellent local contractors list if you need any help with the cabin. And if Mrs. Albright tries to enforce her landscaping rules on your property again, just give us a call. We'll be happy to remind her exactly what the legal boundaries are. The hostile call for removal had resulted in Elias Thorne not only being allowed to move in but being personally greeted, welcomed, and professionally vouched for by the top law enforcement officer in the county. he was home, and the HOA had just ensured he was protected by the best.